All right, guys. I do appreciate you being here. This is my first run, so we'll see how it goes. My name is Darcy Weir. Today I'm presenting on Invest in Our Youth, Invest in Kansas Communities, Examining Alternatives to Juvenile Incarceration. This is a topic I love. It means a lot to me. I definitely want to make sure before I get started, I mention that I've always been interested in the correction side of social work. I did my practicum this last year at the juvenile detention facility here in Sedgwick County. So the kids there that I worked with are really my inspiration for this project, the inspiration for my advocacy. They're my informal yet most valuable resource. These kids are resilient, smart, creative, very self-aware. I'd also like to mention that I do believe in working within the systems that we want to change. So even though it can be hard to work within a system that I don't necessarily agree with, all of the practices, I do believe it's necessary in order to elicit some of that change. So let's go ahead and get into some of these topics. So the grand challenge for social work that I'm addressing in this presentation is to promote smart decarceration. My presentation does focus in on youth as well as youth in Kansas specifically. But in general, what the social work profession is really calling for are three things. I can't see that. I don't remember what that is either. And I'm gonna have to figure out how to zoom in on some of this stuff if possible, because I cannot see all of this. I do want to point out this graph here it's got a lot going on. It is how many youth are currently incarcerated within the United States. So this is a great overview to see what the problem looks like. But in Kansas, to be more specifically, let's focus in on Kansas. And what the problem looks like here is approximately so-and-so youth are incarcerated on an average day. That has gone down significantly. So we are definitely making some improvements, but we still have a lot to work on. So that is the grand challenge that I am really focusing on here. As a little bit of background, let's look in the left corner here where it says injustices involved with current practice. That would probably be your left corner. I'm practicing. So I have in these bullet points several injustices that hopefully we are all aware of, related to mental health. I do want to point out, I talk a whole lot in my presentation about risk factors and protective factors. Minors don't have a lot of control over their risk factors, their socioeconomic situation, their trauma history, their family history, whether or not their parents have had criminal history, or even what neighborhood they live in. They don't get to decide those things. So these risk factors that our youth are facing really need to be, really do require early intervention, which is not something that we're able to do with our current system the way it is. Unfortunately, simply incarcerating a youth is not really addressing the problem at all. In fact, later we'll talk briefly about recidivism and how we're not doing so great on that with our youth either here in Kansas. One of the main injustices I really want to key in on is the disproportionality experienced within our incarceration system in Kansas. Black male youth are disproportionately detained. Here in Kansas, they're 3 times more likely to be arrested, between 5 and 6 times more likely to be detained, and about 7 times more likely to be in secure confinement or prison. This map here down here is really interesting to me because it shows specific states and kind of how they're doing in regards to disproportionality. Kansas is kind of right in the middle. Isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's also not in the red. If you'll notice, there are some states in the red, which means they are disproportionately incarcerating youth at a rate of something that I can't see because I can't figure out how to make this zoom in. Hopefully that is a thing that I can work on. So as far as pillars of advanced generalist practice, and then of course our social work competencies, let's take a look at the cultural competency aspect is huge when we deal with this issue. In 2017, Black youth were more like, that's a typo, were sometimes, some number how many times more likely to be incarcerated. Overall, communities of color are far more likely to be affected by the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system in general. In fact, let's go ahead and call it the criminal legal system, as we know it's not a just system. So another thing we really want to look in on is the social justice aspect. It's written all over this issue. It's huge. These issues don't just affect the people that are incarcerated either. While some legislation in Kansas has improved our numbers, we still are incarcerating the most vulnerable of youth, which makes this a social justice crisis in a way. We have a lot more work to do. In order to best serve this population and enact change within it, we got to use all 9 of our competencies. There are 4 in particular that stick out to me that I want to talk about briefly. The first one is advancing human rights. This kind of goes without saying. Youth already don't have as many rights as adults. But when we take all of that away and confine them, it creates a very unjust situation. Engaging in practice-informed research and research-informed practice. This is huge because, as I'll talk about a little bit later, we know science has shown over and over that incarcerating youth, adults, anyone is very negative. It creates a lot of problems for people. So not only are we not rehabilitating them, we're not addressing the problem properly, we are making people's lives much worse with the system that is currently in place, and that needs to be addressed. Engaging in policy practice, of course, It takes a whole lot of advocacy and policy practice in order to get some of this juvenile justice reform going. Engaging with individuals, families, groups, organizations. I really want to highlight on communities because it's really important that we invite and highly encourage the youth and their families that are directly affected by this to the table, the decision-making table, to allow their voices to be heard. Very important. So it's not just about engaging with them to help them once they are in the system, but also engaging with them and working with them directly to enact change and hopefully see some reform. There are some great groups that I will talk a little bit more about in my conclusion that are doing some amazing work right here in Kansas. As far as what we can do, but also let's look at what has already been done. I want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 367. Again, this is right here in Kansas. Back in 2016, this bill was passed that changed the juvenile justice system in Kansas as we knew it in so many ways, so many different areas. I won't go into every detail, but the main idea of this bill was to decrease incarceration for youth and eventually increase community supports. So we are absolutely headed in the right direction. There are a couple issues. One is that we're not acting fast enough. While our state is trying to figure out how to allocate the money, how we're trying to figure out what is going to work best, what programs are not only available, but what programs are evidence-based and that can actually be funded. Kids are sitting in jail that really shouldn't be there. Kids are serving long sentences in prison at KJCC. People are suffering, people's families are suffering, and this is time sensitive. We need to get working on it. So some of the things that have been talked about, cross systems programs in Sedgwick County. So this is aimed at early prevention for high-risk youth, specifically children in need of care cases. This is huge. I had the privilege of discussing this program with the liaison. So she works for the Department of Children and Families, but she works, collaborates and works directly with the detention center as well here in Sedgwick County because there's so much overlap with these kids. Finding these risk factors, figuring out how to get in there and intervene sooner so that these kids have more of a chance. It's huge. I can't believe we didn't think of this sooner. Again, it's very slow to move. Not a whole lot has been done, but it looks like it's it's starting to get there. And this could be a huge part of our future juvenile justice system, as long as it's implemented well. So there are some other strategies that could be implemented that I haven't added to this presentation yet. The most important thing that we have to discuss is involving the family. Really keying in on those familial relationships. So family-focused treatment is huge. Not only has it been proven to work, but it reaches more people and creates more, even more of a support system for these kids. It's very important. So what the data is trying to tell us is that we've come really far, but we have a lot of work to do in regards to what kind of programs we're going to implement. We have several different ideas, and unfortunately, very little of it is being implemented. Right now, with the reinvestment funds that Kansas has reserved for community programs, very little of it is being used at this point in time. So we're still trying to figure out some of the details. And like I said, in the meantime, kids are really suffering. And there's a lot of kids out there that have a lot of risk factors that could really benefit from prevention programs. So we have prevention programs out based in the community, of course. And then we have another approach that can be simultaneous with prevention, which is going to be changing or transforming the current policies, the current procedures. Changing a lot of the policy is what Senate Bill 167 did, 367, which included changing the way kids qualify for detention. Thankfully, it's less common now than it was prior to 2016 to see juveniles being detained for very minor crimes. It's not as common. So I consider that a great improvement. I want to look a little bit about at this chart here, because this kind of gets into some of the financials. This isn't quite as up to date as I was hoping it would be, but it really does show, if you look here in the yellow, this tiny little yellow, that is the money that we are spending here in Kansas on preventative efforts for our kids. This is all incarceration, all of it. Gray is going to be like probation, ankle monitor, that kind of thing. It's looking like about for every 7 of every 10 of its juvenile service dollars here in Kansas are still spent on incarcerating youth. So again, we have a long way to go. Let's take a look real quick at these values, social work values. I personally am pretty passionate about these 3 values when it comes to this particular issue. Dignity and worth of person. It seems self-explanatory, but unfortunately, even people in the social work profession have the tendency to kind of maybe not cast out, but push aside this particular population. When it comes to corrections and people that we deem criminals and unworthy, it's kind of it can be very difficult to get past that. I would highly encourage you to just, find a way to work with kids or adults that are within the system. If you're a social worker, you're bound to run into them, either in the community or while they're incarcerated. But they're people just like you and I. They are absolutely worthy. Unfortunately, they have learned from society that they're not worthy and that they're criminals. Social justice, again, pretty straightforward. These are some of the most vulnerable and oppressed groups. And incarcerating somebody that is already vulnerable and oppressed just creates a more difficult situation for them. It's very difficult to move on with life and have a happy, productive life after the experience of incarceration, whether it's trauma, difficulty finding a job, the financial impact. It's a lot. Strain on relationships. That brings us to the third social work value I want to talk about. I see it as the most important. Human relationships are an important vehicle for change, but we completely take away a child's most valuable protective factor when we incarcerate them, because it's very difficult to create a support network, to stay in touch with your family in a meaningful way when you're talking on the phone and guards are listening to every conversation. And, really think about the way that COVID has impacted all of this too. Unfortunately, when I was working with some kids at JDF, there were some kids that, hadn't seen or hugged their mom in over a year. So just kind of sit with that for a minute. 15 years old, away from family, can't see or even hug a parent. That's not to say that some of these kids weren't charged with serious crimes that, these issues need to be addressed. Are we doing it in the right way by incarcerating such large numbers of youth? As far as social work theory, I have systems theory, also family systems theory. So family, friends, social settings, religious structure, all these different systems really influence how individuals think and how they act. And it really does relate directly to the crime they commit. So some youth have multiple systems that basically work against them. And that greatly increases their chances of engaging in criminal activity. Rational choice theory, I really wanted to throw in here, I think mostly because of trauma. So even a choice that may seem completely irrational to us may be something that makes a lot of sense to someone that has been through a lot of trauma, someone that is in survival mode. We have to keep in mind that a lot of these people are simply in survival mode. And the way they make their decisions might not be the same way that I do. So white, middle-class woman with an education. It's way different than an individual that is living in a very low income neighborhood with a very high amount of gang activity. It's a very different set of circumstances. So we really have to initiate that cultural competency and really try to meet these people where they are in order to fully understand how to work with them. And again, work with them on changing the system. So as far as concluding, I want to just kind of sum everything up, but I also want to let you know that there are things that you can do. There are things that you should do and that I really hope you do after this presentation. So we have this, this, and this, and I created this nice little acronym, ACTION. So real change requires action. I'd like you to remember that supporting a cause is not the same as advocating for change. So this is very important also to get out there and initiate some change, not just through social work practice, but through advocacy within our communities, within our state. We've got a lot of work to do. And I've got a lot of work to do because I don't know. I feel like I didn't cover anything and I spoke for way too long. So thank you so much for being here, guys. It's awesome.